LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the December 13th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out 24 of the weekend's best clips for what I think should be a really good show for you all tonight. As usual, my clips come mostly from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. I also have a couple political comedy clips from Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live last night. You can see both the main topics I'm covering listed and described down in the video description, and if you're watching the recorded version of the show, you should see time indexes down there to skip between the two topics. I guess there are only two this week. Also, whether you're watching the show live or as a recorded show, I put a link down in the video description to see my clip list in order of the 24 clips I'm using, and you can try to decode these notes that sometimes people can understand. I can usually understand, I hope, but that's what I use to guide myself through the 24 clips. If you're interested, you can look at that. As for the two topics, the first big topic I'm going to cover is the Republican side of the presidential race in the United States for 2016. There wasn't really any coverage or any candidate interviews from the Democratic side, but almost all, I think like 20 of the 24 clips are on the Republican side of the race, and Donald Trump and Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz. No interview with Ted Cruz, but Ted Cruz is a big subject this week, and there's an upcoming debate in Las Vegas between the Republican candidates on Tuesday. And then the other big topic I'll be covering is the agreement reached in Paris on climate change, global warming. Almost 200 countries came to an agreement in this sort of non-enforceable but aspirational agreement, and I'll talk about that for the last 4 or 5 clips of the show, I think. But before I get to that, I want to cover the Republican side of the race, like I said at the beginning, and as usual, I like to start off with a little political comedy. This is the comic take of Michael Che and Colin Jost on the Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live last night, where they talked about whether Donald Trump is really a racist or if he's just selling himself as a racist. And I will discuss that a little more after you watch that clip over here.
You know, this is going to sound crazy, but I don't believe Donald Trump is a racist. I think he's just pandering to the most prejudiced segment of the country. He's hustling them. His best friends are Mike Tyson, Don King, and Omarosa. I know black people that wouldn't hang out with those black people. Donald Trump is as much of a racist as he is a devout Christian gun fanatic. None of what he's saying is true. You don't just develop racism overnight on the campaign trail. Racism is embedded deep down in a person's soul. I've looked into that man's eyes. Donald Trump doesn't have a soul. There's nothing in there but dollar signs floating in cologne. At this point, Trump is the political equivalent of a phone sex operator. He's just whispering whatever dirty little racist fantasies Republicans want to hear. And his supporters are hanging up saying, I think Donald Trump really likes me.
And look, I agree. I don't think Donald Trump is a racist. That's just what he's selling. The same way Peyton Manning sells Papa John's. Okay? He doesn't go home and actually eat Papa John's. I mean, that guy has enough internal injuries as it is. But isn't it almost worse if Donald Trump doesn't believe what he's saying? Because it's one thing to sell Papa John's. It's another thing to sell it by saying we should round up all the Taco Bells and send them back to Mexico.
So that was a moment of humor, I thought, in the Saturday Night Live last night. Most of it wasn't really that funny, although the cold open, I'm not taking a clip from that, but they had an old George, or they brought George W. Bush, or an impression of George W. Bush by Will Ferrell on to open the show, and that's actually available on YouTube. And also, I put a link down in the video description to the entire episode of Saturday Night Live if you're interested in that. Although most of it I didn't think was actually that funny. But what also isn't that funny is the Republican candidates for the presidential race, and it looks like Trump is maintaining his level of about 20 to 30% nationally, and he's falling a little behind now in Iowa to Ted Cruz. And I want to start off showing first the latest NBC poll, and then they also reference a Des Moines Register poll that shows Trump still in the lead, but Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio somewhat, but especially Ted Cruz having his moment in Iowa now, I guess, as you can see in this clip.
Till voters actually start expressing their opinion, we have two new polls out on the Republican race for president, pointing to what may be developing into a three-man race. So let's get right to some of these new numbers. Donald Trump is back on top in our new national NBC News Wall Street Journal poll, sitting at 27%. Up 4 points since late October. That's the highest number he's had in our poll so far. Ted Cruz is surging, now in second, sitting at 22, more than double where he was in October. Marco Rubio also on the rise. And then look at old Ben Carson, the one-time leader. Believe it or not, he led in the last NBC News Wall Street Journal poll. Well, he is now dropped dramatically to 11%. Here's the rest of the candidates who picked up at least 1% in our poll. Note that Jeb Bush still stuck in single digits. Then there's this bombshell out of Iowa. Today's Des Moines Register Bloomberg News poll has Cruz surging into the lead with 31%. It's a stunning 21-point gain since October. Trump is more or less holding steady at 21, followed by Carson, who here too has crashed. He's down 15 points since October. Then Rubio and Bush. So what we think we're seeing.
So that was the latest NBC poll along with that other poll. And what's more interesting, I think, about the NBC analysis this morning, and I'm going to show in this next clip from Chuck Todd, is they split the Republican field up into a three-way race between an establishment candidate, and they have Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush in that lane. They call it three lanes. And then they have a conservative evangelical candidate, and there they have Ted Cruz and Ben Carson fighting for that vote. And then in the middle, you'll see they have Donald Trump in his own lane, and this is kind of splitting up into the possibility of a contested Republican convention. And I think there are a couple problems with this, especially with the Rubio-Bush lane. I think there are a lot of possible candidates other than Jeb Bush who could fit into the establishment candidate lane, but I'll talk about that a little more after you see that Meet the Press clip with Chuck Todd from this morning here.
News Wall Street Journal poll. We also asked, who would you choose if the race narrowed down to just these 5 candidates? Well, here's what we found out. The race narrows to 3 lanes. Take a look. In lane 1, the establishment lane, Bush and Rubio, their totals add up to about 30%. Cruz and Carson, their lane of evangelical Christian conservatives, they add up to about 37%. Then there's the Trump lane, all of its own. He hits 30%. So what distinguishes these lanes? Well, when it comes to the establishment lane, it's education. Here, Bush and Rubio, 56% of their combined supporters have a college degree. Let's go to the evangelical lane. In that second one, the Carson and Cruz voters, 56% of their voters attend church weekly. That is probably the biggest distinguishing characteristic. Now, let's go to Trump, because in this third and final lane, it appears to be a new force in the Republican Party, at least when it comes to primary politics. For instance, 64% of his supporters didn't attend college, sort of the polar opposite of the establishment lane. Then you've got this fact, 61% of his supporters do not attend church weekly. Again, opposite of the evangelical lane. There's one more distinguishing characteristic worth pointing out. This is sort of a blue-collar vote. Again, that hasn't been a force in Republican primaries before. 54% of Trump supporters earn less than $75,000 a year. So the question is, to get the nomination, somebody is going to have to succeed in uniting at least 2 of these 3 lanes. Who's got the best shot at that? Right now, we might say it could be Ted Cruz. We shall see. It's something to watch for. Later in the broadcast.
So Ted Cruz apparently is possibly in the best position to unite 2 of those 3 lanes, and one of those lanes that they're talking about is maybe the Donald Trump lane. And I thought that was an interesting analysis, especially looking at the Donald Trump voters as non-religious, non-college educated people who don't make that much money. And a little bit later, I'm going to show a clip from CBS's Face the Nation where Frank Luntz had a focus group of, I think, like 25 or so Trump supporters. And when you watch those people, I think you will kind of get the idea that they're non-college educated and kind of working class. But I don't want to get to that clip yet. I want to actually critique one, as I said in that last clip from Meet the Press, in the establishment candidate, they had Marco Rubio, who is doing fairly well, and then they had Jeb Bush in there, who is not doing that well at all. I think that Chris Christie may have a better chance of being the establishment candidate, or John Kasich might do well in that establishment lane. And so I'm not sure exactly why they put Jeb Bush in there. And in fact, Jeb Bush's his candidacy is doing so poorly that it was the subject of ridicule over on Weekend Update on Saturday Night Live last night. This is Colin Jost making a joke about Jeb Bush's campaign over here.
According to a new report, Jeb Bush's campaign and the super PAC supporting him have spent more than $30 million on ads for him. And from the looks of those ads, it seems like things aren't going great for Jeb.
Send some money today.
Another funny moment. I thought that was kind of a funny punchline with the reference to the animal shelter commercials. I don't know if everyone's familiar with those ads for the puppies and the kittens who are, with the mournful eyes asking you to donate to the SPCA, or I can't even remember exactly what the group is, but those ads come on where I am on TV all the time, and so I thought that was kind of funny. And moving from the joke to what's actually going on between Donald Trump and the Republican Party, apparently there was this GOP establishment dinner this last week where the people who meet at this restaurant or have this dinner every week had a discussion about how they were going to have a how they would deal with a contested convention, how they're going to stop Donald Trump, and especially with his racist comments this week about stopping all Muslims from coming into the United States. I know some people don't think it's racist to say those kinds of things about Muslims, since Muslims aren't a race, but racism actually has kind of a broader definition than just based on the typical races, that even those don't even really exist, but anyway, I don't want to go into all that. I want to show how Meet the Press covered the conflict between Donald Trump and the establishment over in this clip.
In American politics, Democrats fall in love, Republicans fall in line. So we thought. Not this year. The opposite has happened. Democrats are falling in line with their established candidate, Hillary Clinton, while it's Republicans, like a rebellious teenager, smitten with the bad boy on the motorbike in Donald Trump. And the parents, in this case the Republican establishment, are taking a very dim view of that relationship, terrified that a Trump nomination would wipe out Republicans up and down the ballot.
Noisy majority. It's no longer a silent majority. It's the noisy majority.
As Donald Trump weathers yet another storm of his own making.
Are you racist?
I am the least racist person that you have ever met. I am the least racist person.
The Republican establishment is grappling with how to keep the nomination away from Trump without alienating his supporters. The party's leaders in Washington rush to condemn Trump's plan to ban Muslim immigration.
This is not conservatism. What was proposed yesterday is not what this party stands for.
That would be completely inconsistent with American values.
The root of the panic? That Trump at the top of the ticket will mean a wipeout down the ballot, losing the Senate for Republicans and even putting the House in jeopardy. But while Trump's 2016 rivals warn Republicans that he is unelectable,
if he continues to do what he's doing, he's destroying the party. There'll be a generation before we can overcome this, maybe never.
All of this helps his buddy Hillary Clinton, for sure.
Those establishment rivals are mired in single digits. And Trump's latest comments don't appear to have damaged his standing among certain Republican primary voters.
Who's cutting off people's heads? Who's bombing buildings? Who's bombing airplanes? It's not the Christians. It's not the Jewish. It's not the Buddhists. It's the Muslims.
41% of Americans believe Trump's campaign statements are frequently insulting and have the wrong approach. But that's true of just 16% of Republicans. Conservative rival Ted Cruz is raising questions in private about Trump's judgment.
Who am I comfortable having their finger on the button? Now, that's a question of strength, but it's also a question of judgment.
but in public avoiding a cage match, tweeting, "Sorry to disappoint. Real Donald Trump is terrific. Hashtag deal with it." Behind closed doors, Republican Party officials are preparing for the possibility of a contested convention. On the record, the party chair is treating Trump cautiously, telling a conservative newspaper he disagrees with Trump's Muslim ban, but turning down requests to make that point on camera. And Republican officials worry about angering Trump supporters. A new coalition of white working-class voters fighting to remake the GOP, who themselves may be open to an independent run by Trump.
If I'm 2 votes short, I have a problem, because I'll have to go into that convention and I'm dealing with all these bloodsucker politicians, and they'll make their deals. But if I get the number of delegates, it's not a thing they can do. And I'll end up doing fine with the establishment. Again, I was a member of the establishment 6 months ago. So
I'm joined.
So that's the NBC Meet the Press report from Chuck Todd about the conflict between Donald Trump and the establishment. And then the next clip I want to show is the one from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. They had a somewhat similar report from Jonathan Karl, and he concentrated, I think, more on the Cruz angle and the coming conflict between Trump and Cruz, as I will discuss after you watch that clip over here.
50 days until the Iowa caucuses, and while Donald Trump still has a commanding lead among Republicans nationally, Ted Cruz has a big lead in the state that gets to vote first, and Trump has Republican leaders gunning for him everywhere else. Is this the week the Republican Party came undone?
it was pretty brutal 4 days ago for Trump.
On Monday, Donald Trump announced his most outrageous and controversial plan yet.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
Party leaders denounced the proposal as not just wrong, but un-American.
What was proposed yesterday is not what this party stands for, and more importantly, it's not what this country stands for.
Every candidate in the race not named Trump opposed the plan. Jeb Bush even called Trump unhinged.
I'm not one of these other guys that goes down. I don't go down, I go up.
Do you have a warning for GOP leaders?
I say, folks, I'm sorry I did this to you, but you got to get used to it. It's one of those little problems in life.
But now that new poll out of Iowa shows Cruz 10 points ahead of Trump in the Hawkeye state. A Trump ally in public, Cruz was caught on tape obtained by the New York Times questioning whether Trump has the judgment to be president.
Who am I comfortable having their finger on the button? Now that's a question of strength, but it's also a question of judgment.
That prompted Trump to take a subtle swipe at Cruz.
I do like Ted Cruz, but not a lot of evangelicals come out of Cuba, in all fairness. It's true.
Ben Carson threatened to leave the party after the Washington Post reported that GOP leaders discussed whether Trump can be stopped at the party's convention.
I think the party should not be doing anything that is deceptive and under the covers and that thwarts the will of the people.
A party in disarray, setting the stage for the last Republican debate of 2015 in just 2 days. Trump's Iowa problem has been brewing for some time. Back in October, it was Ben Carson who was in the lead. And if you remember, George, back then, Trump responded by saying, "How stupid are the people of Iowa?" It turns out that insulting Iowa voters may not be the most effective way to win over their votes.
Okay, John, thanks. Let's get more on this.
So I don't know if Trump does end up losing Iowa. You may see him again saying that the people of Iowa are stupid, as he did in that comment, that previous comment. But the polls right now it's still 50 days away. I think that got a little cut off at the beginning of that clip, but that was mentioned in several clips. I may have already been mentioned in a previous clip that we're 50 days away from the Iowa caucuses. And this next clip is actually Fox News Sunday had their own Fox News poll to announce that has similar results showing that Ted Cruz is kind of surging in Iowa, although they still show that most Republicans want Trump as the candidate who's going to beat Hillary Clinton. This is a much shorter clip, which I'll discuss after you watch it here.
We'll have our in-depth interview with Donald Trump in a moment. But first, a new Fox poll which finds there's a tight battle for the lead in Iowa. Among likely caucus goers, Senator Ted Cruz now stands at 28% and Trump at 26%, within the poll's margin of error. Marco Rubio and Dr. Ben Carson are the only other candidates in double digits. But when the results are narrowed to Republicans who say they will definitely attend the caucuses, Cruz's lead over Trump expands to 7 points, 32% to 25%. Still, when Iowa Republicans are asked who's most likely to beat Hillary Clinton, 32% say Trump, far more than pick Cruz or Rubio. On Friday, I sat down with Trump.
So that was the quick Fox News poll that also shows basically a fight between Ted Cruz and Donald Trump in Iowa. And that was also the theme over on CNN State of the Union, where Jake Tapper started the show by, he always says, what is the State of the Union? In this case, it's cruising for a showdown because of the Ted Cruz versus Donald Trump showdown that may be coming up in the CNN. It's a CNN sponsored debate coming up on Tuesday, and you'll even see the countdown to the debate. And later I'll show a clip from State of the Union where Jake Tapper announces who's going to be on the main stage and who's the four that are going to be on the, the, I don't know what they call it, the kiddie table debate. But anyway, here's Jake Tapper talking about the Ted Cruz versus Donald Trump showdown in this clip.
Hello, I'm Jake Tapper, live in Las Vegas, where the state of our union is cruising towards a showdown. Two major new polls out this morning showing Senator Ted Cruz mounting a major challenge to Donald Trump. In Iowa, Cruz now leads, beating Trump 31 points to 21 points in a Des Moines Register poll. Nationwide, Trump's still on top, but Cruz is biting at his heels. Trump at 27, Cruz at 22 in a brand new poll hot off the presses. Now, Trump leads more substantially across the country as well. Recent polls in New Hampshire and South Carolina still show him leading, and the CNN poll out of Iowa shows him in first place. But make no mistake, Cruz is surging and mounting a major challenge to the Republican frontrunner Donald Trump. Now, until now, the two have played nice with each other. But even before Cruz officially pulled ahead in Iowa, according to that Des Moines Register poll, Trump seemed to be previewing a new line of attack, perhaps designed to play to the state's religious conservatives.
We're doing really well with the evangelicals. And by the way, and again, I do like Ted Cruz, but not a lot of evangelicals come out of Cuba, in all fairness. It's true. Not a lot come out.
So, yeah, that's how State of the Union started on CNN. And now I'm going to move on to showing you 4 clips of actual interviews with Donald Trump. This is about 7 minutes of Donald Trump. I know some people find that a little distasteful, but and then there'll be one additional Donald Trump clip a little bit later. But the first one I want to show is Donald Trump responding to the criticism from Ted Cruz. This is the Donald Trump versus Ted Cruz battle that's coming up, and Chris Wallace raises it with Donald Trump in an actual in-person interview, not a telephone interview. And here's Donald Trump's reaction, which does have some kind of attacks on Ted Cruz over here.
You lead in almost all the polls, except for a couple in Iowa, where Ted Cruz is slightly ahead of you. This week, Ted Cruz apparently told some supporters that he questions your judgment to be president. What do you think of Ted Cruz?
Well, do you notice he said it behind my back? Somebody taped that conversation. He said it behind my back, and that's okay. Look, I don't think he's qualified to be president.
Why not?
Because I don't think he has the right temperament. I don't think he's got the right judgment.
What's wrong with this temperament?
Well, you look at the way he's dealt with the Senate, where he goes in there like frankly, like a little bit of a maniac. You're never going to get things done that way. Look, I built a phenomenal business. I'm worth many, many billions of dollars. I have some of the greatest assets anywhere in the world. You can't walk into the Senate and scream and call people liars and not be able to cajole and get along with people. He'll never get anything done, and that's the problem with Ted.
Most of the...
So, yeah, it's a little strange to see Donald Trump accusing someone else of not having the temperament and not being able to get along. And I think there's actually several versions of that because Donald Trump was on more than one show. But the next clip I want to show is also from Fox News Sunday, where Chris Wallace asked Donald Trump about his conflict with the Republican establishment, and especially this idea that they may try to block his nomination at the convention. And you can see Donald Trump's response to that over here.
Top Republicans met in Washington this week and discussed the possibility of a brokered convention to block you from being the GOP nominee. Your reaction to the idea that members of the establishment, some members, are talking about trying to stop you?
Well, I think they're making a big mistake, number one. I think I'm going to be the one that beats Hillary. The Fox poll, your own poll, came out and said I beat Hillary rather easily. And I think they are kidding themselves. I'm leading in virtually every state. I'm leading in Iowa, although a Des Moines Register does a poll, and I'm sure that'll be negative when they announce their poll.
But when you say that they're kidding themselves, meaning what?
They're kidding themselves. I'm going to win. I think I'm going to win. I'm not one of these other guys that goes down. I don't go down. I go up. My whole life has been about winning. I'm going to win.
You say that you may break your pledge and run as an independent if the party doesn't treat you fairly. When you hear about leaders talking about a brokered convention, when you hear about the New York GOP, some people saying, let's throw them out, do you have a warning for GOP leaders?
Look, I understand what they're going through. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was a member of the establishment 7 months ago. I gave $350,000 to the Republican Governors Association. I'm not supposed to be doing this. You see, I'm supposed to be on the other side writing checks and having people do whatever I want.
So what do you say to the
puppets,
Republican
like
leaders?
Puppets. I say, folks, I'm sorry I did this to you, but you got to get used to it. It's one of those little problems in life. Now, I'll see whether or not I'm being treated fairly. I want to run as a Republican. I'm a conservative guy. I have great ideas. I'm going to make our country great again. I'm going to make it great again. It's a mess. Right now, our country is a mess. So I think they're going to be very happy. I think if I win, in 2 years after I win, I think we're going to have the happiest people in the world. Okay? But I understand, Chris, I understand where they're coming from. This wasn't supposed to happen. They were supposed to pick a governor, a senator, a puppet, where they control them 100%. This wasn't supposed to happen.
It's some things you have said haven't made.
So that is Chris Wallace getting Donald Trump to respond to this idea that the establishment is going to block him, but he doesn't seem too worried about it, but he is keeping the possibility of running as a third-party candidate if he isn't treated fairly, and that's definitely some leverage he has on the Republicans, I guess. But the next clip I want to show is also from Fox News Sunday, and it's Donald Trump responding to questions about his ban all Muslims from entering the United States policy and the problems that's caused. And even you saw in some of those earlier clips that the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, came out and said that it was not conservative and un-American, and most of the Republicans have actually come out against it, but it hasn't hurt Donald Trump in the polls. He's actually gone up in the polls, if you can believe the one or two polls that have come out since he made the statement. Here's Chris Wallace trying to get him to explain his policy of stopping Muslims from coming into the United States, and basically I think his response is that it's too dangerous and we have to be strong, is best I can tell, over in, wait, let me make sure I got this clip right.
You say that the Muslim ban is about security, not about religion, but you would block all foreign Muslims. That's 1.5, let me just finish.
Okay, go ahead.
1.5 billion people from coming into this country. Are you saying that all of them are potential security threats?
We have people flying airplanes into World Trade Centers. We have people shooting people in California like happened last week. We have big problems. Problems that nobody understands. You don't understand them. I don't understand. People don't understand them. The Muslims have to help us figure out. There's tremendous hatred there. There's tremendous hatred. But where it comes from, I don't know.
I think here's the point, Mr. Trump. I think people would understand it if you were basing it on countries, saying, don't let people in from Syria or Libya, war areas. But
Well, I've done that also.
But there are 200 million Muslims in Indonesia.
I've done that also.
There's a Canadian businessman who's a Muslim. Are you saying they can't come in?
There's a sickness. They're sick people. There's a sickness going on. There is a group of people that is very sick, and we have to figure out the answer. And the Muslims can help us figure out the answer.
Here's what Speaker of the House Paul Ryan said this week.
This is not conservatism. What was proposed yesterday is not what this party stands for, and more importantly, it's not what this country stands for.
Ryan says you would violate the constitutional guarantee of freedom of religion.
Look, I like Paul Ryan. Very, very weak on illegal immigration, big on amnesty, very, very bad on our southern border. Let people pour in. It's not the kind of thinking we need. We need stronger thinking than that. And I like him. He's a nice person. But we need stronger thinking than that. I want the Muslims to help me. I knew there'd be a storm. I'm a very smart person. I knew there'd be a storm. But we need the Muslims to help us figure it out.
This week, you've been called a bigot.
I don't know. I don't really buy that. I don't think many of you watching really buy that explanation. I mean, it's just rhetoric. It certainly doesn't justify the proposed policy of banning all Muslims from entering the United States, but it doesn't really make sense. But I'm going to move on to the next clip, which is kind of this interesting analysis from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos of how Donald Trump fits into this sort of global move towards populist candidates. And you'll see several mentioned from Europe in this report. And then it moves on to show how people in those various countries are reacting to Donald Trump's comments on banning Muslims from entering the United States. And despite this wave of populism that they start off talking about, it doesn't seem like there's much of a positive reaction to Donald Trump around the world. But I'll talk about that a little more if you watch that clip here.
D. Snyder's "We're not gonna take it." It's the essence of his anti-establishment appeal. But Trump is not alone. In country after country, populist leaders are gaining ground, like Marine Le Pen in France, who's soaring in the polls with a Trumpian brew of anti-immigration policies and nationalism. In Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orban is sounding the same theme, and he's building a razor wire fence to keep Syrian refugees from flowing in. In Britain, there's Nigel Farage of the small UK Independence Party, but none have gone as far as Trump.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
That extremist proposal Trump unveiled this week shocked people around the world. In London,
it's not right. It's not fair. 2 million people, not just me.
In the West Bank,
the United States was built and founded based on immigrants.
In Paris,
I think it is very crazy.
In Dubai, they tore his name and face off a billboard at his golf course there. And British Prime Minister David Cameron called Trump's idea divisive, unhelpful, and quite simply wrong. U.S. officials and many others worry that Trump's proposal plays right into the hands of ISIS, who will use it for recruitment. Trump's Muslim ban was thrown into sharp relief Friday as Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau greeted a plane load of Syrian refugees.
You are home.
Thank you. Welcome home. But so far, being the Republican establishment's nightmare,
The establishment's got a problem.
is working just fine for Donald Trump with Republican voters. For This Week, Terry Moran, ABC News, London.
So Terry Moran for ABC was reporting from London on this worldwide reaction. And then also from Paris, I want to show a clip of Secretary of State John Kerry. I'm going to have 4 clips of him at the end talking about climate change. And he actually did the full Ginsburg, appeared on all 5 programs, although I'm not going to show everything he said on all 5 programs because it was pretty duplicative. And one thing he said, I think, on every single program was he was asked about how the world was reacting to Donald Trump's comments about Muslims. And basically he said what I'm going to show you here, and I will discuss it a little more after you watch that answer. This is from CBS's Face the Nation, talking to John Dickerson about Donald Trump and how the world's reacting in this clip.
One last question, Mr. Secretary. You spent a lot of time talking to Muslim nations and paying attention to America's image in Muslim countries. What effect does it have that there's a conversation about banning Muslims from coming into America?
Well, let me be very direct. I believe that that kind of a ban is contrary to American values. It's contrary to our Constitution. But I also think it's a very dangerous foreign policy, because it says to those in Islam who are trying to exploit people and recruit foreign fighters and otherwise, it says, look at America. Here they got a guy running for president who is waging war against Islam. That's their impression. It's exploitable, whether he intended it or not. And it allows for recruitment. It allows for America to seem like it is indeed discriminatory against Islam, against Muslims, and it is highly discriminating against many Americans and others who are Muslim, and many people in the world who know that their religion has been hijacked and who want to recoup it. So I think it's got a huge downside in terms of American foreign policy, and I hear this from foreign ministers and others as I travel and engage with people in various countries.
Secretary John Kerry.
So that was from CBS's Face the Nation, and I'm sorry if some of the audio levels on some of the clips are a little bit off. I think that clip might have been a little bit louder than the other clips because there was a big storm here in Northern California, and it's one of the reasons I was kind of late starting. I had a power outage in the morning during the time that I usually record the shows that I take the clips from, and several of the shows, Face the Nation and This Week with George Stephanopoulos, didn't record because, of course, the power outage struck right during those. There are only 4 hours I record these shows, from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. local time for me, and the power went out from like 8:20 a.m. to 10 something, so it was right about a third of the time I usually record the shows. And so anyway, Face the Nation, I had to take the clips off of the web, and I even had to join Hulu Plus to get the streaming version of the This Week with George Stephanopoulos episode I wanted. Anyway, so I apologize if some of the audio levels are a little louder on some of the clips, and this next clip is also taken off the web on the CBS Face the Nation YouTube channel, actually. And it's about half of this 10-minute segment on Frank Luntz's focus group talking to Donald Trump supporters. I think it's very informative as to why people support Donald Trump and what keeps them going. So this is about 5.5 minutes, I think. It's the part where Frank Luntz shows most of his interactions with the focus group. Then he has an interview with John Dickerson where they talk about the results, and they show a little more. If you want to see the whole thing, there's a link down to Face the Nation in the video description. But here's about 5.5 minutes. Frank Luntz, there's a little introduction from John Dickerson, and then Frank Luntz talking to about, I think it was 25, 29, something like that, Donald Trump supporters over in this clip.
We turn now to campaign 2016 and the Trump phenomenon. Last week, Republican consultant and CBS News contributor Frank Luntz gathered 29 past and present Donald Trump supporters in Virginia to get their thoughts on the Republican frontrunner, including his controversial comments on Muslims.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Raise your hands if you agree with him. 14, 16, 17.
They don't want to become Americans. They want to come here and blow up America and kill us.
All Muslims? Some. Trump we have no way of knowing. All Muslims. No. Temporarily, we have no way of knowing who they are. Yes, we need a temporary halt. That's a very reasonable position.
We're legitimately afraid. And the president is not making us feel safer.
Yeah, he wants to yell at us about gun control.
I think we're all scared. I'm actually a little jumpy, I find, and Trump is the only one who would come out and say something like this. Yes. No one else would do
and
it.
So you credit him with that?
I do. Mm-hmm. I mean, no one else would say it. Who would say it?
So you don't see, even in this room, this explosion of points of view that maybe he went too far in what he said?
Well, you know what Trump does? He says something completely crazy and inflammatory, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And then he dials back and sort of starts explaining it and saying how he would
But
do.
it creates the conversation,
And it makes
which I
sort
think
of
is
sense.
good.
Trump is smart like a fox. He's in campaign mode. He has to be proactive. He's intentionally playing the media. He's saying things that are right on the edge. He's exaggerating. He's saying things that he knows the mainstream media will grab and throw a gasoline on, and it goes really big.
We're not believing everything he's saying. Nobody's. No, we're taking it for exactly what he just explained. He goes out and he makes a huge fuss to get everyone's attention, to get his issues addressed. We want someone to take a stance. We want someone to say, yes, okay, here's what we're gonna do.
Is it his persona, his tenacity, his raising of issues you care about?
His personality is just so large. I mean, he's out there, he's getting everyone to talk about stuff, just like the lady back here said.
He is entertaining. He's giving everyone something to talk about.
He looks presidential and he acts presidential.
You think he acts presidential. So when he said, and I quote, I would bomb the shit out of ISIS.
And this is when
he used the word shit.
Good.
That's presidential?
Yes. Americans think the country's in crisis. Trump is telling them the country's in crisis, and people flock to a strong leader when they think the country's in crisis.
Not people, you. Don't talk about people. You flock to Trump.
Yeah, I'm attracted to his persona.
Because?
Because of what's happening in the world. International affairs. He stands up there, he gives the image he's not going to put up with any crap.
You're an African American. Why do you support Trump?
Because he's saying stuff that needs to be said. When it comes to the general election, I think a significant number of African Americans will support Trump because the entertainment fact that he has, that he, the persona, he's a businessman.
If Trump gets elected, he will have people that will coach him to ensure that these type of things aren't said out loud.
We've seen a lot of bad things that Trump has done. We've seen a lot of bad things that he's said. However, we've got a lot more problems in this country that I feel that he is more qualified to handle.
Socially, we are tired of political correctness. I think we're being burdened with it. I think it's making us weaker as a country globally. And I think that he represents that voice of that frustration, that political correct frustration.
Yeah, he makes mistakes. He's human. He says some things that are off color that I'm embarrassed by occasionally. But I still think he's a leader, and those prove that he's a leader.
I just think we need a complete shakeup, and I think he's the only one that can do it.
Here's a $64,000 question. With Marco Rubio as the Republican nominee and Trump running as an independent, who here votes for Trump? Raise your hands. Right now, the establishment Republicans just died.
Yes, they should. They haven't been listening to us.
It's time for a real change.
It's just not going to
It's
come.
a real change.
That's more than half of you. Just raise your hands that you're going to leave the Republican Party.
Correct.
No,
We're
the party
voting for
is
a
left us.
person.
I'm voting for a man or woman that wants to change his country.
I admit I'm stunned.
He said it.
That's
Yeah.
right.
He
They
said it.
left us?
They left
They
us.
left us.
If they're not listening, I'm voting for the person. Not, I'm wanting, and he's still out of all of them. Rubio has the energy, but I think he has the energy and the actual means to happen.
We could take the people with. I think that there's enough of us out there who would go out who've never knocked on doors before ever.
Yeah,
And that would actually bring my Republican brother, hey, come on, let me talk to you.
The Republican
I've never
Party-
done that.
The Republican Party has failed us the last two times with weak candidates. First with McCain, who was weak, then with Romney, who was weak. We're tired of weak candidates. There is no number two to Trump. Who's number two in the Republican field to Trump that can really win the election? Who?
Trump is an independent. You're voting for Trump.
Yes, yes.
Trump is an independent.
Yeah, I'd vote for him over Rubio because maybe the party does need to be fractured. Maybe it's time to blow it up.
Then Hillary will be the president.
Blow it up.
And Frank Luntz.
So, yeah, they want to blow up the Republican Party, I guess, and they wouldn't vote for Marco Rubio, who is the leading establishment candidate, I guess. That was that last Trump supporter mentioning how he wouldn't vote for Marco Rubio, and a lot of them were saying they'd vote independent rather than vote for Donald Trump. And the next two clips I want to show are actually of Senator Marco Rubio. He was over on NBC's Meet the Press, and here he is answering a question from Chuck Todd as to whether Donald Trump is bad for the Republican Party, and he says basically that he is, but that people are are legitimately scared, and that's why they like Donald Trump over in this clip.
Donald Trump has been good for the Republican Party and for Rubio's candidacy.
Obviously, I don't agree with everything he says. There's a lot that we have a difference of opinion on, but we can't ignore that he's touched on some issues that people are concerned about. If you look at the statements he made this week, obviously I think he made them partially to recapture the limelight after having lost it. And I do think we've lost some of the focus on the attacks in San Bernardino and focused on a plan that isn't really a plan and is never going to happen. But he is reminding us in that process that people are really upset and they're really scared. They're worried. And I think the president made things worse last Sunday with his speech, not better. And you know, that's what he's focused in on.
You called his comments offensive and outlandish. That's a lot different than the tone you just took with me right now.
Well, it's offensive and outlandish in the sense that, for example, it's not going to happen, number one. I think it violates a lot of the things that we think about our country, but also the practical reality that in order for us to identify homegrown violent extremism and prevent it or root it out before it takes action, we were going to need the cooperation of Muslim communities in this country. They may very well be the first ones to see it. They're the ones that are going to see radicalization happening at a mosque or hear it in the community or even among their own family members. And so, and the other part is that there's a narrative that ISIS and other jihadists pose that this is a war between Muslims and the rest of the world, and that sort of victimization narrative is something we shouldn't contribute to. On the other hand, we have to acknowledge that there is a radical element in Islam, jihadism, that needs to be called by name and needs to be confronted.
About 3 months.
So, I don't know, some of that seemed halfway reasonable compared to Donald Trump on the Muslim issue, you know, in terms of opposing what Donald Trump said, but that isn't all that out of the ordinary for the Republican establishment, as you saw in some of those previous clips describing how, you know, the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, and several other Republicans came out against Donald Trump's anti-Muslim comments. And to the extent Marco Rubio was kind of halfway reasonable in some of that answer opposing Donald Trump, when he was opposing his other main rival, Senator Ted Cruz, he actually tried to get to the right of Ted Cruz on surveillance issues, you know, NSA bulk phone record collection, especially because Ted Cruz, along with Rand Paul, has been one of the Republicans in the Senate who's been against bulk phone record collection and NSA spying. So here's Marco Rubio first praising bulk phone record collection and worrying about the new system where the phone companies hold on to the records, and then with prompting from Chuck Todd actually going directly after Ted Cruz. And I think, as you just saw Marco Rubio go after Donald Trump, his other main rival, the way he's going after Ted Cruz may be a preview of what you're going to see from Marco Rubio on Tuesday in the CNN Republican debate, because Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio are going to be on either side of Donald Trump, I believe. But anyway, I'll talk about that a little more. Do you see that clip here?
Period of time. Under this new law, we are trusting the phone companies to hold those records. And all of these phone companies have different periods of time when they hold it. Some will hold it for 18 months, some will hold it for 6 months. This is a valuable tool. If in fact you have identified someone as a potential terrorist, or if in fact someone carries out a terrorist activity, the ability to look at who they've been calling and who they've been talking to is part of a larger puzzle that you can put together to see what network they've been working with, who they've been communicating with. We have now lost that capacity in many cases.
So is this a commander-in-chief test for Senator Cruz?
I believe it is for all the candidates. You know, in the case of Senator Cruz, my argument is it wasn't just the intelligence vote. I mean, he talks tough on some of these issues. For example, he's going to carpet bomb ISIS, but the only budget he's ever voted for in his time in the Senate is a budget that cut defense spending. By more than Barack Obama proposes, we cut it. He voted against the Defense Authorization Act every year that it came up. And that is the bill, and I assume that if he voted against it, he would veto it as president. Well, that's the bill that funds our troops, even the Iron Dome for Israel. So I guess my point is, each time he's had to choose between strong national defense and some of the isolationist tendencies in American politics, he seems to side with the isolationists. And this is an important issue to have a debate over. It's not personal.
There's been
Ooh, that was a pretty strong burn there from the fairly mild Senator Marco Rubio. Oh, in honor of Marco Rubio, I should probably do a on-camera Marco Rubio here. And Senator Marco Rubio wasn't the only one. I guess I already showed Donald Trump attacking Ted Cruz as well as Marco Rubio. But the next couple clips I want to show are of Dr. Ben Carson. And in this first one, Dr. Carson attacks Senator Ted Cruz as well, after these clips come from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where the host George Stephanopoulos interviewed Dr. Ben Carson, and this first clip starts with George Stephanopoulos asking him why he's fallen so precipitously in the polls, and then specifically gets him to respond to an attack or criticism from Ben Carson about both Ben Carson and Donald Trump not being ready to be commander-in-chief in this clip.
Ben Carson, he joins us this morning from Florida. You've seen those poll numbers, Dr. Carson. What do you think went wrong?
Well, you know, poll numbers go up and down. I wasn't excited when they're up. I'm not excited when they're down. You know, this is a very fluid contest, and it's the reason that we have it. We have opportunities for people to listen carefully, you know, not to listen to the spin, but actually to listen to what's being said. And, you know, the people will make the correct choice.
You know, Ted Cruz thinks he does know what went wrong. In that tape we showed in the piece, he not only went after Donald Trump, but he also questioned what voters are thinking about you. Let's listen.
Who is prepared to be a commander-in-chief? Who understands the threats we face? Who am I comfortable having their finger on the button? Now, that's a question of strength, but it's also a question of judgment. And I think that is a question that is a challenging question for both of them.
How do you respond to that analysis from Ted Cruz?
Well, you know, we've all had different types of experiences. There's no question that I haven't spent a lot of time schmoozing and asking for big money and going to cocktail parties. But I've spent many a night in the operating room, cold, sterile place with a little child's life on the line, working very hard to preserve that. You know, that's a very different kind of experience. Lots of 2 a.m. in the morning calls and making snap decisions on what needs to be done.
You think that's the extent of Ted Cruz? Excuse me for a second, sir. You think that's the extent of Ted Cruz's experience schmoozing, going to cocktail parties with donors?
Well, I think he has a different kind of experience, more of a politician's experience. And I have a healer's experience. And it's a different kind of experience. And the fact of the matter is, you know, I've had a lot of experience in corporate America. I've worked with a lot of CEOs. And one of the things I recognize is that a good CEO doesn't necessarily know everything, but he gets a lot of people around him. He has a vice president of HR, of finance, of mergers and acquisition, et cetera, and uses them in an appropriate way. There is no way that I or anybody else who's running is an expert in every area. There's no question about that. But do you know how to use the people around you? Do you have wisdom and judgment? And that is demonstrated by the life that you've led.
But you know, you've been making that point.
So, I don't know. I don't think that's actually working with the voters anymore, at least the polls, because as George Stephanopoulos started to say, where I cut that clip off, Ben Carson's been making that same argument that he has this different experience, but it's, you know, good emergency surgery means that he had to make life and death decisions more than any other candidate, and he knows how to listen to experts, and I don't know. I just don't think that people are buying that, because a lot of times he's come across as not knowing what he's talking about, and he goes back to his talking points a lot in ways that aren't really responsive to the question. I think that's a little bit true in this next clip and final clip of Dr. Ben Carson, where George Stephanopoulos asks him about Donald Trump's, you know, controversial policy of banning all Muslims from entering the U.S., and Ben Carson disagrees with it, but then he kind of goes back to his talking points about Syrian refugees, that he should have concentrated. You'll see Ben Carson says he should have concentrated on the Syrian refugees, and then he talks about his trip back to Syria, which you'll kind of recognize the same talking points from clips I've shown of Ben Carson over the last few weeks, or the last couple weeks since his trip to Jordan. And then at the end of this, he doesn't really respond to George Stephanopoulos' criticism about how he flip-flops quickly when he takes the wrong position. But anyway, here's that ABC clip from this morning here.
Reaction this week to Donald Trump's comments about banning U.S. entry to Muslims. You said you disagreed with it. Others have gone further. Marco Rubio called it offensive. Jeb Bush said Trump appeared unhinged. Did you find these comments offensive?
Well, those are probably not comments I would have used. I understand the concept of, not letting people in until they are well screened. I just wouldn't do it on the basis of religion. But it makes absolutely perfect sense for us to start doing something now and not to just let people in. This whole Syrian thing. When I was over there, nobody wanted to come here. They wanted to be resettled in their own country. And there are adequate ways to do that. There are adequate ways to take care of them in Jordan. If we needed to take them, that would be a different story. But taking tens of thousands of them doesn't solve the problem. There's millions of them. That's just a Band-Aid that makes some people feel good like they've done something.
But your campaign has had some inconsistent statements on this broader issue. On Monday, put out a statement saying everyone visiting our country should register and be monitored during their stay. Then on Tuesday, you told Jake Tapper at CNN that idea is ridiculous. Do you understand how that kind of a flip in just 24 hours might give voters pause?
Well, it's not a flip, because you have to listen to what I said when I talked about monitoring. What I said is when I go into another country, they want to know where I'm going, what address I'm going to be staying at, how long I'm supposed to be there. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about monitoring. I'm not talking about following them around with the FBI.
You just want them to lay out their itinerary.
Yeah, I mean, we should be able to find them. We should know what they're doing here.
But won't a terrorist just lie?
Well, again, we're going to have to be a little smarter. I mean, you've probably seen some of the questions that they ask in the screening. Have you ever been a terrorist? Are you planning a terrorist attack? Have you been trained with tactical? Give me a break. I mean, we have to. Why don't we go to the Israelis and ask them how they do it? Why do we have to reinvent the wheel?
You have said that you do not believe that Islam.
Well, the Israelis do behavioral profiling, which is not racial or Muslim profiling the way people want to do it here in the United States, but they actually spend a lot of time interviewing people and not through like low-level TSA employees who don't have a lot of training, but through like highly trained people who know how to ask questions, and not like, did anyone pack your bag? But anyway, I don't want to go into the whole thing about Israeli security and how it's a type of profiling that isn't racial profiling, but you can look that up on the internet, I guess, if you're more interested in that. I want to show one more clip of Donald Trump. I remember earlier I promised or warned or that there would be one more Donald Trump clip, and this is actually, so, every now and then Donald Trump surprises you by saying something that you kind of agree with, or that you didn't expect Donald Trump would take that position. And I guess that's because he is kind of ideologically unmoored from conservatism, really. His views kind of go all over the place. And some people think that he's actually, if he gets the Republican nomination, he's going to reset his views totally and move more towards the center and sort of show off some of his previous more liberal and democratic views. But in this case, then maybe this is a foreshadowing of that. Although I've watched this clip a couple times, and I think, like a lot of what Donald Trump says, the more you watch it, the less substance there really is there. But here's Donald Trump saying something unexpected about one of the news items from this week here.
At the Supreme Court this week, Justice Scalia raised the issue of whether it might be better for some African American students to go to a, quote, slower track school where they do well, unquote, as opposed to a more elite college. Now, you have said that you're fine with affirmative action, though it is coming to a time when maybe we don't need it. What did you think of Scalia's remarks, and where are you today on affirmative action?
Well, I thought his remarks were very tough. I mean, I don't want to comment on him. He's a respected Supreme Court judge, but I thought his remarks actually were very, very tough.
Tough in a bad way or in a good way? Or?
Well, I think they were very, very tough to a certain community.
To the African American community.
I thought it was very tough to the African American community, actually.
This sounds like you're not supporting what he said. Like
I don't like what he said, no. I don't like what he said. I heard him, I was like, let me read it again. Because I actually saw it in print, and I read a lot of stuff, and I'm going, whoa.
So you still support affirmative action?
Look, I have great African American friendships. I have just amazing relationships, and so many positive things have happened. One thing I will say, and I will say this, and I say it to everybody, Barack Obama has done very little for the African American community. You look at unemployment, you look at all of the problems. But yeah, I was very surprised at Scalia's statements, actually.
Interesting. Donald Trump, thank you. As always, you always sit down, you always take the floor.
So, yeah, Donald Trump thought what Scalia said was tough and surprising and tough on a certain community. And then when Jake Tapper asked him if he was for affirmative action, he said he had a lot of friends who are African American and that Barack Obama has not done much for the black community. But that wasn't really a yes or no. It was pretty slippery. But on the other hand, it seemed like he was criticizing Justice Scalia, which isn't something you would hear from, I can't think of any other Republican candidate who would, during the Republican primary, who would come out against anything Justice Scalia said because he's such a hero of the conservative movement. So in that way, it's surprising. But before I leave the topic of the Republican candidates for president for 2016, and I know it's been a lot of clips, the next clip is also CNN State of the Union Jake Tapper announcing the lineup for the debate this Tuesday. And I'm pretty sure, I only saw this clip once real quick, but I'm pretty sure what I said before is true, that Donald Trump is in the middle, and then he will be flanked by Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz, his closest challengers. And then there's also an announcement of the 4 Republicans who didn't make it to the main stage, but will be in the early preview debate. Anyway, here's that announcement from Jake Tapper this morning. Here.
Right now, your first look at the stage, and there are 9 podiums up there. During the primetime debate, Donald Trump remains front and center, flanked by his newest closest rival, Ted Cruz, and also Ben Carson. Also on the main stage, Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush, John Kasich, Chris Christie, Carly Fiorina, and Rand Paul. And in Tuesday's first round debate, Mike Huckabee, Rick Santorum, Lindsey Graham, and George Pataki will face off. The candidates are...
So, yeah, I guess I was wrong. Actually, Dr. Ben Carson is the other person who's next to Donald Trump. And the polls still show, I'm pretty sure that Ben Carson, well, it depends on the poll. I showed you a whole bunch of polls. But in a way, it might be more interesting to have Marco Rubio right next to Donald Trump. I don't know if that really makes that much of a difference, but if there's going to be interaction between the candidates, the most intense interaction, I guess, would be between candidates who are physically next to each other. I don't know. You can let me know what you think about all that and what you think about all those clips I showed on the Republican side of the presidential candidate race for 2016. It's a little disappointing that there wasn't any coverage of the Democratic side this week. I'm not exactly sure why that was. I mean, Hillary Clinton, I know, did some events, and I know Bernie Sanders did several events. He even did one in South Carolina today that I saw was covered live on one of the YouTube channels I follow, but there was basically zero coverage other than, I think, that one poll from Fox News Sunday where they talked about how most Republicans think that Trump is the best one to take on Hillary Clinton, but that's pretty much the extent of the coverage of the Democratic side, so I don't have that for you. But there was a somewhat significant coverage, or there was some coverage at least on all 5 of the programs on the big climate deal that was reached over the weekend in Paris, because Secretary of State John Kerry appeared on all 5 of the programs, and he said pretty much the same thing everywhere. I think on every single program, pretty much the first question had something to do with how there were no actual sanctions, no enforcement mechanism in the agreement, and having also something to do with that it's not going to go to Congress. I'll show one example of that. This is John Kerry appearing over on NBC's Meet the Press, where first Chuck Todd does a brief introduction of what happened in Paris, and then asks him the same question that pretty much all the interviews started with about the lack of enforcement over in this clip.
Can be a turning point for the world. We've shown that the world has both the will and the ability to take on this challenge.
That was President Obama last night on the climate change deal struck in Paris yesterday. The agreement aims to keep the increase in global temperatures well below 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of the century. It also aims to raise about $100 billion to help developing countries adapt their economies in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Now, it was not drafted as a treaty to avoid President Obama having to take it to Congress for approval. And late last night, Paris time, I was joined by Secretary of State John Kerry, and I started by asking about the lack of an enforcement mechanism in the agreement. There's a lot of pledges, there's a lot of promises, but there seems to be no mechanism for getting countries to comply other than wagging your finger at them and shaming them. Am I wrong?
Well, that's the most powerful weapon in many ways, but it's not the only weapon. And in fact, we think there are other powerful weapons. President Obama understood, and believe me, he's been really committed to getting this done. And it's his leadership in America on our own climate action plan that gave us credibility here. And the president has been able to do that without some of that enforcement mechanism, but by setting policy. Here we set policy. 186 countries came together and each submitted their own plan for reductions according to their capacities. We have a mandatory, legally binding reporting mechanism, Chuck, and that reporting mechanism requires people to retool their plans every 5 years in order to do more than they might be doing and meet the goal. So I believe you're going to see, I mean, people understand this issue. This is not a question of just doing it because it seems nice or politically it's good. It's because it's having a profoundly negative impact on nations. They need to respond, and that's perhaps the most compelling reason of all.
But you say legally binding. Okay, so somebody doesn't comply. Again, is it what's this law that you're going to hit them with other than international shame?
There's a mechanism that is being set up within this structure that will promote compliance. And you will have nations within that mechanism working with countries in order to help bring them on board. You don't always need a sledgehammer. If you can provide people with technology, or you provide them with technical assistance, or you've discovered a new means of reducing emissions more at less cost, more efficiency, there will be a huge sharing of these kinds of experiences through the reporting mechanism of the agreement. And that's going to have a profound impact on a lot of countries, Chuck. Is it enough to necessarily get us there? Probably not, but what it is enough to send a very powerful message to the global marketplace. And we expect somewhere in the vicinity of $50 trillion to be spent next 30, 40 years on energy. That is going to be one of the greatest reasons that nations spontaneously move in this direction, because there are jobs to be created, money to be made, and there's a population to respond to in terms of the demand of their citizens.
I know that you can go.
So that was pretty much the same set of talking points that Secretary of State John Kerry used on all 5 of the Sunday morning news analysis shows. Like I said, he did the full Ginsburg, and I think he did the interviews late last night from Paris as the way it was introduced on some of the shows. So this was probably about 12 to 18 hours ago. I'm not exactly sure, but I want to show a somewhat different version of that same answer because I thought George Stephanopoulos actually asked the question in a particularly interesting way by taking a critic from the left rather than the right. This is James Hansen. I think George Stephanopoulos may introduce him as sort of the father of the climate change movement or something like that. He's the NASA scientist who's been a great advocate for fighting the problems of climate change, and he apparently had some criticism of this agreement because it doesn't have any. I don't know so much the enforcement, but he said it's words and not actions, promises. But and anyway, here's how John Kerry reacts to that, and some of the same talking points, but it's a little bit different, and I'll discuss that after you watch it over here.
In Paris yesterday, as nearly 200 nations approved the first global agreement on climate change. The Paris Accord will aim to limit global temperature increases and their catastrophic consequences by curbing greenhouse gas emissions, cutting the use of fossil fuels. President Obama gave the agreement an emphatic endorsement in a rare Saturday evening statement from the White House.
The targets we've set are bold, and by empowering businesses, scientists, engineers, workers, and the private sector, investors, to work together, this agreement represents the best chance we've had to save the one planet that we've got.
And we're joined now by Obama's chief negotiator, the Secretary of State, John Kerry. Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us. Pretty remarkable to get 195 nations to agree on anything, but the agreement does have significant critics too. James Hansen, the NASA scientist who many see as the godfather of the movement to take on climate change, said this to The Guardian. He said it's a fraud, really, a fake. It's just worthless words. There is no action, just promises. Your response?
Look, I have great respect for Jim Hansen, and I was there in 1988 when he first warned everybody climate change was happening. But with all due respect to him, I understand the criticisms of the agreement because it doesn't have a mandatory scheme and it doesn't have a compliance enforcement mechanism. That's true. But we have 186 countries for the first time in history, all submitting independent plans that they have laid down, which are real, for reducing emissions. And what it does, in my judgment, more than anything else, there is a uniform standard of transparency. And therefore, we will know what everybody is doing. The result will be a very clear signal to the marketplace of the world that people are moving into low carbon, no carbon, alternative renewable energy. And I think it's going to create millions of jobs, enormous new investment in R&D, and that R&D is going to produce the solutions, not government.
As you know.
So that was one of the two clips from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos that I want to show of the John Kerry interview. The other one I thought was, and this is the next clip that follows immediately where I cut that one off, where George Stephanopoulos asked John Kerry about Mitch McConnell's statement. You know, Senator Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader of the U.S. Senate, who basically, well, you'll see the quote from him where he said that this is an unattainable agreement and that it is possibly illegal, and you can see how John Kerry reacts to basically Republican criticisms of the agreement, having answered that James Hansen criticism from the left. Here's George Stephanopoulos getting Secretary of State John Kerry to react to criticisms from the right over here.
It is not legally binding, in part because the U.S. couldn't get a treaty through the Senate. And the Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has also weighed in quite strongly already, Mr. Secretary. He's saying that before the president's international partners pop the champagne, they should remember that this is an unattainable deal based on a domestic energy plan that is likely illegal, that half the states have sued to halt, and that Congress has already voted to reject. So can this deal actually be implemented absent a consensus in the United States?
Well, there is a consensus in the United States among the American people and among mayors across the nation, all of whom are already, many of whom, excuse me, but those, all of them that have joined a mayor's conference with respect to climate reductions. And the fact is the United States of America has already reduced its emissions more than any other country in the world. And it's done so through various means, by raising the efficiency standards on automobiles, by engaging in R&D and deployment of new technologies. And the president has made it very, very clear that he's committed to this. And this agreement really came about significantly due to American leadership, with President Obama engaging with China, coming to an agreement with the two largest economies, the two largest emitters, saying they were going to join together to put out their reductions And that spurred 184 other countries to step up. So this is significant. I mean, what do members of Congress think when leaders of major countries around the world are actually stepping up to do these things? These are not,
Mr. Secretary,
these guys aren't making up the science or the plans to do it. And I think, frankly, a lot of members of Congress are on the wrong side of history, and I don't believe you can be elected President of the United States if you don't understand climate change and you're not committed to this kind of a plan.
Well, that's what I want.
Well, I wish that Secretary of State John Kerry was right. What he said there at the end about how you can't get elected President of the United States if you reject the science on climate change. I don't think that was really true of George W. Bush, and I don't think that it would preclude a Republican from getting elected in the United States. Unfortunately, at this point, it's become too much of a partisan issue. And speaking of the partisan issue on climate change, the last clip I want to show is from Fox News Sunday, where they also had on Secretary of State John Kerry, and they started the interview with the same question about enforcement pretty much, but question that I'm going to show Chris Wallace asking Secretary of State John Kerry is kind of the mirror image of that last Mitch McConnell question from George Stephanopoulos on ABC. In this question, Chris Wallace on Fox News is asking John Kerry to justify why he doesn't take this agreement to the U.S. Senate. Isn't this, he doesn't say executive overreach, but he basically says it's another example of the Obama administration overusing executive power and not using not working together with the Congress. And this is the last clip I'm going to broadcast for you tonight. You can let me know what you think of it after you watch it over here.
Secretary, you've talked about Congress wouldn't accept it. The last global climate agreement, the Kyoto Protocol in 1997, was a treaty. It was never ratified by Congress. But in this case, as with the Iran deal, it's not a formal treaty, and you're cutting Congress out. Why?
Well, Congress, Jim Inhofe today said this doesn't need to be approved by the Congress because it doesn't have mandatory targets for reduction, and it doesn't have an enforcement compliance mechanism. So, in fact, we did exactly what Congress said we had to do for them not to be able to need to endorse it, but it's a plan that can work. And everybody in the world feels it will start us down the road. Is it going to get us to the final level? No. But what it will do is send the right message to the marketplace that 186 nations in the world came together to submit a plan, all of them reducing their emissions, most of them already engaged in the effort to do so. That is going to change the marketplace, and it's also, we've already seen the curve of emissions are beginning to come down. If we can stay on that track, we have a chance to avoid the worst damage of climate change.
Mr. Secretary, thanks for your time.
So that's the last clip I want to show you tonight. Secretary of State John Kerry, who I'm sure is going to be spending more time defending this climate agreement, even though it doesn't have to go through the Congress. It is going to still be talked about in the news. I hope it stays in the news. There have been all these terrible terrorist incidents that have overshadowed this big climate conference in Paris, which, as I said, and I guess those of us on the left have been ridiculed by some on the right as saying that climate change is actually a bigger national security threat over the long run than terrorism is. But in terms of the impact it's going to have on people, that just happens to be the truth. I guess the facts can't get in the way of the people on the right ridiculing people on the left, but it's Senator Bernie Sanders said about how climate change actually affects terrorism and affects the global instability, and got ridiculed for that, but it happens to be the truth. Anyway, I appreciate all of you who showed up to watch this as a live show. I think we peaked out around 190 people. I've been reading your comments along the way. Unfortunately, I can't save them all like I used to be able to. By the time the broadcast is complete all the comments from the beginning are gone in all the windows that YouTube gives me access to. So I'll try to save some, but I used to post like the 1,000+ comments that were that all my live viewers posted. Now I can't do that. If you go and look on my Patreon page, there's a link down to my Patreon page in the video description. It's one of the first links. You'll notice that Patreon has revamped the way they show how many pledges I have, that to more accurately reflect the amount of money that I get after they take their cut, and people, a certain number of people's pledges drop out every month. And so last week I was I was at like $350, getting closer and closer to my $400 goal. Well, this week, if you look, I'm now back down to $300. So if you want to become one of my patrons, if you appreciate all these clips I picked out and the 8 or so hours worth of work I put into producing the show every Sunday, since if you may have noticed last week, no monetization, because I think terrorism is too sensitive a topic to be monetized on YouTube, at least for my channel. Hopefully this week will end up being monetized, but if you want to help me out, you can, so that I don't have to depend on YouTube advertising, you can become one of my patrons. I think at the beginning of the year I may start giving out some sort of premiums for my patrons who have donated a certain amount so far. It's a month-to-month thing, and if you don't want to pledge a month-to-month thing and you live in one of the 4 countries where you can do fan funding on YouTube, there should be a little eye up in the corner of the video here where you can click on that and become one of my direct fan funders on YouTube. That also helps helps me make videos without having to worry about YouTube advertising revenue, which is pretty uncertain even when the videos do get monetized. But I wanted to let you know that I'm hoping to be able to do another debate clip roundup for the Tuesday CNN debate. It won't be on Tuesday. Hopefully it will be sometime Wednesday afternoon, this coming Wednesday afternoon Pacific time here in California, which I think is currently Greenwich Mean Time -8 hours. So look for that. I may also have a chance to finish that video I was talking about last week. No one said they wanted to see it, but I want to make this video about war on Christmas caused by San Bernardino shooting ? About how Fox News floated this idea that maybe the San Bernardino shooting was part of the war on Christmas, although I'm worried that if I spend time finishing that, since it has to do with the San Bernardino shooting, I won't be able to monetize it. But anyway, that's just something for me to worry about. But if it's a good video and people like it, I guess it doesn't matter if it gets monetized or not. Or it's just, it depends on your philosophy of life and of video making, and I don't know. I don't want to go into all that. I need to finish up the show. I appreciate all of you who watched it live and who are watching it later as a recorded show. I hope you appreciate the clips I picked out and it left you more informed, especially about the Republican race and a little bit about the climate treaty. I will definitely be back next week, probably sometime around 6 p.m. Pacific time. There will be one more Saturday Night Live before Christmas. It'll be hosted by Tina Fey and Amy Poehler. So those were 2 people who I thought made the show a lot funnier. And I've been complaining about it not being funny. So maybe next week will be funnier Saturday Night Live for me to take those clips from to start the show. And I guess until next week, or until I do this debate clip roundup on Wednesday afternoon sometime, I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.